We're ready?
Mhm. All right, good evening to all of our viewers in India, and of course, good morning to our guests who are on the other end of the world. But this is our weekly conversation as part of the TEDx Gateway program. So, the webinars that we're having in India right now, the idea is to bring interesting voices, ideas, thoughts into your living room to sort of push us forward in this phase of lockdown and COVID-19, to get us to think about different things and how the world is changing around us, and how things are going to be different after COVID-19, and how we can adapt and be ready for that change. Um, I have a really interesting conversation for you. It's a part of our series of conversations on healthcare, what we're learning about healthcare, what we're learning about the human body, and of course, what COVID-19 is teaching us about healthcare. So, very interesting guest to introduce to you, and I'm happy to bring you this conversation. Well, it's very easy to say that for these two gentlemen, whatever they do takes guts, because what they're doing effectively is studying the human gut. Now, this is a branch of science called microbiome studies. Now, microbiome effectively believes that there are millions and millions of bacteria that live in our digestive tract. And it's these bacteria that regulate so much of our body that we're still discovering and we're still understanding it. So, for example, just to give you a quick example before I bring in my guest, scientists have found that these microbiomes in the gut can actually predict how we respond to viruses, predict how we respond to any situation, to the food that we eat, to the air that we breathe, to all of the things that are going into our system. In fact, it's gone as far to say that these biomes and their secretions go into our bloodstream. They affect all of our organs. They affect all of our hormones, and even affect how we feel. So there are scientists around the world right now trying to figure out medication and treatment for Alzheimer's, for autism, for depression, for anxiety, from a study of the biomes and the chemicals that they secrete in our digestive tract. So we've only barely scratched the surface, and it's a super interesting conversation to have really about what's going on. So these are the gentlemen that I'm bringing to you today, and I'm very happy to do so. Dr.Momo Vuyisich is the co-founder and the chief science officer at Viome. It's obviously a data-driven precision nutrition company. Now, the idea with Viome and the company that we're talking about is to revolutionize healthcare and to basically use symptom management as true preventive medicine. Instead of having to treat something and put more chemicals in your body, to find a way to use the bacteria that already exists in your body to prevent things from occurring. Dr. Vuyisich is also the adjunct professor at the University of New Mexico and New Mexico Tech. He has a PhD in biochemistry right now. We also have Mr. Naveen Jain, who's the founder and the CEO of Viome. Now, Viome is very interesting. Like I said, the idea here is to make illness optional, according to Mr. Jain. He's a serial entrepreneur. That's the only way to describe him, with much success under his belt. And he basically is driven with an aim to solve the world's problems. His most interesting, for me at least, other than the work that's being done with microbiome right now, is the Moon Express, which is the only private company in the world with permission to harvest resources from the moon. And that's a whole different conversation for a different day. But for today, we're focusing on the biome research. I would like to first hand over the stage, virtually at least, to Dr. Vuyisich, who will take us through what's going on in the guts and what we've learned from it so far, specifically to do with the COVID world, what that teaches us. Dr. Vuyisich, good morning, and go ahead.
Hello, Faye. Thank you. Great introduction. So do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll just give the audience a 3-minute intro to microbiome and what is it and why it's important and why we need to read all about it and pay attention to it. So these are some statistics for the United States, but it's actually these kind of stats are becoming more common in other countries. So the sad status of healthcare in the United States is that we spend $3.3 trillion per year on healthcare, and 90% of that is for chronic diseases. Yet, if you look at the graph on the right side, chronic diseases are actually increasing. And so we're pouring more money into it, and yet the diseases are increasing. So what that means is that we're not really treating diseases. We're not really curing them. We're not preventing them. We're just managing the symptoms. And that's what costs us $3 trillion per year. That's really unacceptable. And so what about genetics? There's all these genetic tests out there, and they're promising some kind of health. Well, we sequenced the human genome 20 years ago, and after 20 years of promises, genetics has essentially failed to provide any kind of preventative measure for chronic diseases. And so today, if you do a genetic test and they tell you you have a certain risk, that's just risk. It doesn't mean at all that that's what's going to happen to you. So please read about that. But here's where the action is. So genetics is talking about your DNA, the genes that you're born with and that you're going to die with. This is what we focus on at Viome, is not DNA at all. We don't sequence DNA. We sequence RNA. These are molecules that are copied from DNA, but they're very dynamic. They're not static. And so if you look at this dramatic picture here, this is the colon of a person with IBD. And you can see that when their colon is healthy, it looks fantastic. A month later, literally 1 month later, this is what their colon looks like when the disease goes from remission to relapse. This is the same person, the same DNA. The DNA hasn't changed. But what's dramatically different is the RNA, or the gene expression in this tissue. And that's what changes from health to disease. And so if you study DNA, you will not see any of these differences, and you will not be able to predict these changes or be able to actually treat them. So we have to study RNA. And so the nice thing about gene expression, or RNA, is that we can actually modulate it with diet and lifestyle. So another concept I would like the audience to understand is that human body is an ecosystem where our genes represent actually the minority of the total genes expressed in this ecosystem. And so while we have 20,000 genes that we inherited from our parents, we actually harbor microorganisms in our body that express at a minimum of 50,000 genes on every person. And so microbiome determines much more of our chronic health and disease than do our own genes. And so microbiome and nutrition and lifestyle are key to prevention and treatment of chronic diseases. So we'll delve a little bit into more technical stuff, but you guys have probably, most of the audience has probably heard of serotonin. It's a very well-known hormone and neurotransmitter, and majority of it is actually produced in the intestines and not in the brain, as you can see here. And so not only is majority of it in our body produced in the intestines, it's actually regulated by the gut microbiome, meaning our cells don't just produce it on their own. And serotonin has been implicated in every type of human behavior that you can imagine, and yet the bacteria, to a large extent, control its production. So that's how important the microbiome is for our well-being and health. And so I want to introduce a concept of micropoop. So humans have evolved to depend on the products, the products that microbiome produces. These are chemicals or metabolites, or what I call micropoop. Basically, when you consume a diet, microbes are like chemical factories. They will also consume that diet because that's what they live off of in the gut. And they will produce biochemicals or metabolites. And it's these metabolites that humans have evolved to depend on. And so you can see here on the right side that our body does not care at all what we have named these bacteria. So my body doesn't even know that there is a bacterium there that humans have named Faecalibacterium prausnitzii. That doesn't make any difference. It also doesn't make a difference that I have that bacterium. Just having that bacterium in my gut microbiome does not mean that it has any benefit to me. So its presence. And so by knowing that it's there, it doesn't actually make too much of a difference. What matters is it actually producing a healthy biochemical, in this case called butyrate? And so what you can see here on the left side is if I consume diet 1, that same bacterium will produce butyrate and I'll be very healthy. But if I switch to a different diet, that exact same bacterium will no longer produce that butyrate. And so the fact that it's there will not be beneficial to me. And so what's extremely important is not only who is there, but what they're doing and what diet we're feeding them, so that these microbes can actually produce healthy biochemicals and keep us healthy for a long time. So that's sort of the crux of it. Do I have more time?
Yes, you may go ahead. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so these are sort of general concepts, and what I would really like the audience to take home is that there's been this mystery about chronic diseases. We have an unacceptable situation today where more than 50 major chronic diseases have no known cause, meaning we wait until we have the symptoms of the chronic disease, even though the disease actually started decades earlier. And then we have drugs that manage those symptoms, meaning if you take any disease, let's say rheumatoid arthritis, if you take rheumatoid arthritis, modern medicine has no way to stop that disease or to reverse it and cure you. The only thing that they can do is give you very powerful drugs that suppress your immune system and slow the disease down. That's it. Whereas there are many, many cases, including mine, where I was able to completely cure my rheumatoid arthritis. I mean, completely cure, meaning I have been completely symptom free for 5 years. And that is 100% regulated by diet. It has nothing to do with magic or some mystery. It has nothing to do with my genes. It has to do with diet. And so this is exactly what I encourage every single member of the audience. If you do not feel well, you need to find out what is the root cause of that ill. You don't just say, well, I'm getting older or that's normal. It's not normal to be sick, and it's not normal to go and find a drug that manages the symptoms. What you need to do is really try hard to find the root cause of your disease, eliminate that root cause, and then you'll be disease free. And that's really what we do at Viome. And so you wanted us to mention a little bit about what does the future of healthcare look like, and I actually have that. So the future of healthcare looks like this. It's going to be delivered via an app. So it's going to be self-care. No doctors are going to be needed. It's going to be preventative. It's going to be absolutely focused on prevention. And it's going to be highly personalized. Every one of us has a different microbiome, and we require a different diet, different exercise, different fasting, different supplements, and sleep. And so it's going to be highly personalized for all of these matters. And it's going to be displaying you on the app exactly what to eat and what not to eat, when to exercise, how to exercise, when to fast, and so on. And for each disease, it's going to be displaying your risk and not the general risk or the average risk of the population. It's going to be displaying your risk so that it can warn you before you actually develop the symptoms of a disease, and then tell you exactly what to do so that you don't develop that disease. And I highlight here that it's going to be free to people. And why is it going to be free? Today, someone is paying for everyone's healthcare, whether that's a self-insured employer or a health plan or even the national government. Someone is paying for healthcare. And as soon as those entities realize that by paying for this personalized lifestyle and diet, we're going to prevent diseases and have much lower healthcare costs, that entity that currently pays for healthcare is actually going to pay for this personalized care. Now, how do I know that this is going to happen? I'm not actually speculating here. The only way to predict the future is to invent it. And at Viome, this is exactly what we do. Every day we wake up 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We wake up and we build this future so that we don't wait and speculate on what the future might look like. We're actually creating it actively. So we know that this is what the future is going to look like.
Excellent. Dr. Vuyisich, a really quick question, and I'm breaking the schedule here to just ask you a quick question before we go to our next speaker. When you say that the future will be preventive and predictive in terms of healthcare, will it require for each and every individual to have their microbiome studied and then have a mapping put out saying this is what you should ideally eat? Is that the future?
Yes. So this system that I describe here, it will require that every person provides maybe quarterly or something like that, every 4 months, a saliva sample, a stool sample, and a blood sample. But all of these will be collected at home, and we're bringing all this technology to people directly to their homes, so that instead of going to a lab and getting blood drawn in 18 vials and sending it to 20 different labs for analyses, this will be a finger prick blood test, and they can collect it at home. They can ship it at room temperature to our labs, and we will analyze it. So that product is actually coming to the market this month. So that's one thing. And so it's not just the gut microbiome. Gut microbiome is a very important determinant of our health, but it's not the only player. There's the nutrition, and then there's our own genes that also play an important role. So you have to study the gut microbiome, the oral microbiome, as well as the blood transcriptome, which is the gene expression of the human genes. And we're also going to introduce the vaginal microbiome. Vaginal microbiome is extremely important, not just for women's health, but it's also important in determining the health of pregnancy. And we will be able to, in the future, very precisely, in a data-driven way, actually prevent preterm birth and prevent any kind of neurodegenerative diseases in newborns.
All right, so this is super interesting. So what we're talking about right now is a future of healthcare and medicine where it's not about treating the symptoms or suppressing the symptoms, but actually preventing the disease altogether. And this could be done with a clear study of the microbiome in your body, along with
Yes.
your genetic information, and to prescribe behavior, lifestyle, and diet that could then help you prevent whatever you might be particularly vulnerable to. So now let's bring in the entrepreneur behind all of this. And I want to bring in Mr. Naveen Jain. Mr. Jain, here's the question. You have a brilliant scientist working on your team who says that this will be free of cost. What does an entrepreneur do with that sort of science that's going to be free of cost?
Absolutely. And just because it's going to be free of cost to the people who are going to be using it doesn't mean it's not going to be paid to an entrepreneur or to the company. In a sense, it's going to be funded by the employer. It's going to be funded by the insurance system. It's going to be funded by the government, right? So in some sense, the reason is today we spend $3 trillion trying to essentially suppress the symptom. Imagine if we could spend 1/10 of it simply to prevent the diseases from happening at the same time. And I think one of the things that I really find most fascinating is we are living in the most innovative decade in the human history. There has never been a better time to be alive. This is the first time when we are seeing the confluence of many of these exponential technologies all coming together. That means for the first time, we are able to digitize the human body. No longer we have to rely on this thing as a black box that we put something in our mouth, something magical happening inside, and we somehow get sick, right? What if you can understand every single thing, every biochemical activities that are happening inside your body? And today, obviously, we have to be able to, get the sample, and which is a very crude way of doing it. We prick our finger, get the blood out, and someday we're going to look back at it as such a crude way of doing things. Or we analyze the saliva, or we analyze the stool. I think there's going to be a time in the next 5 years where all these things are going to be happening automatically. In a sense, we're going to have a smart toilet who's going to be analyzing all of our stool and urine. There's going to be smart tiles. There's going to be smart mirrors. There are going to be all the things that are constantly around us, the devices, they're going to be analyzing our voice, and ultimately our toothbrush is going to be analyzing our saliva. And if you go back, you go forward 10 years from now, there are going to be nanobots inside our body that are constantly analyzing what's happening in our body, constantly informing your smartphone what is going on, and it's going to be constantly repairing your body. So to me, the future of our healthcare is going to be literally is going to be not only just precise, is going to be precisely developed just for you, because there are no two humans are alike. Even though we share the same DNA, and Faye, you are smart and you are just absolutely this brilliant person, but you and I still share 99.9% same DNA. And it's not very obvious to most people that how can Faye and Naveen ever be alike 99.9%? But that's really the trick, is that our DNA is the same, but what is being expressed is constantly changing. And that is the key, that our genes are not our destiny. Our genes expression. And I think as Momo pointed out, that we are a truly walking, talking ecosystem. We take so much pride in the fact that we are humans. But if you look at this world, we are primarily a microbial ecosystem. The microbes came onto the planet Earth 3.5 billion years ago. The humans are very 100,000 years old. There are 40 trillion, not millions, 40 trillion microbes living inside our gut. Just to give you an idea what 40 trillion means, there are 9 billion people on the planet Earth. If there were 5,000 Earth, and all the human beings on 5,000 Earth live inside each one of us. So think about it. There's so many of them, and with a little bit of human DNA sprinkled into that, right? So literally, if you think about it, they control who we are. They express almost 2 million to 20 million genes. And what Momo was talking about, 50,000 is at any point of time, but they're capable of expressing somewhere between 2 million to 20 million genes, while the humans' DNA only expresses, give or take, about 22,000 protein coding genes. That means 99% of all the genes that are potentially expressed in our body are not our own. And that is the key. And, to large extent, one would argue that, we live for them. By the way, so now the research, as Faye, you pointed out in the introduction, the research is clearly showing that many of us can't lose weight. Why is it that someone can easily lose weight, someone can't? And it is literally your gut microbiome. And in fact, very interesting, you and I both know people who can eat bread all the time and never gain a pound. And some of us smell a bread and we gain weight, right? That literally is what happens, that we can eat the same food, but have a completely different impact on that. And that is the key to understanding how each one of us are reacting to the things. And this concept that people talk about, that somehow I eat healthy. And the trick really is, there is no such thing as universal healthy food. A food that's healthy for one person can actually be harming other person. And so one man's food is another man's poison. And that's the key. Is that, for me, when I analyze my own gut, it turns out the things that I thought I was eating healthy was spinach. And I thought spinach has to be healthy for someone because I grew up watching Popeye. And Popeye said, all you do is eat spinach and you get strong. You know what? Popeye was not the scientist. And that is the fact, is the spinach is not good for everyone. The broccoli, for me, what was harming me was broccoli, the cabbage, and the Brussels sprout, because my gut microbes were producing too much sulfide. Couldn't eat. I love lentils, the dal and the things. And I couldn't eat them because my protein was not being digested and they were being fermented in my gut, causing inflammation. So for each one of us, there is a different food. And the interesting thing, is not a lifetime. As I changed my diet, guess what happened? My gut microbes changed, and the things that were bad for me actually were okay for me 4 months later. And that is the thing, is we have to constantly keep our body constantly tuned. And somehow it looks like that, Faye, that we invented something that is so novel. But the point is, we knew this thousands of years ago. Ayurveda talked about that, we all are different types of people, and there is different foods that are good for each person. In fact, every doctor who graduates takes a Hippocratic oath, and they forget what Hippocrates actually said. He said, all diseases begin in the gut. Let food be thy medicine, let thy medicine be the food, right? And to me, that is the core of who we are as humans. So if you want to know, like, today it is proven that diabetes, heart diseases, autoimmune diseases, depression, anxiety, Alzheimer, or even cancers, that now we are finding that every cancer, from pancreatic cancer to breast cancer to colorectal cancer, and all of these different cancers are caused by the microbial activities. In fact, just by looking at your oral microbiome, that means microbiome in your mouth, we can predict that you have oral cancer. We can actually detect oral cancer with 91% accuracy just by looking at your saliva. So now imagine, not only the microbes are responsible for having these multiple types of cancer, but even the cure for the cancer, or even the drugs that we take, how they work and how much toxicity they create or how effective they are, that also depends on our gut microbiome. So when you pop in a pill, it gets completely transformed and changed by a gut microbiome. And that's why some people can take the same medicine, have no effect or have a lot of side effects, and some people none. So literally, unless we are able to understand each one of our body at a level, at a molecular level, to be able to see how the food and the drugs are going to work for us, we are simply trial and error. It's called praying. Hopefully it works. We don't have to rely on a faith. We can now actually understand each one of us and actually precisely adjust our own diet and precisely adjust our own medicine that will have the best effect for us. And I think I'm just so optimistic, Faye, that our future for our children is brighter than ever. And I think you and I have a power to make disease optional. And all I can say in closing is, I lost my dad to pancreatic cancer, and I promised him that I'm going to work every day hard so that no one else has to lose their loved ones ever again. To me, we can prevent all of these diseases. And if you and I and millions of us can come together and understand these human diseases, there is going to be a day where being sick is going to be truly a matter of choice, not a matter of bad luck. And I sure hope that if not for just for us, we do it for our children and grandchildren to make illness truly optional.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Vuyisich and Mr. Jain. Mr. Jain, quick question, follow up from what you're saying. People want to know what is the level of readiness of this service right now in the West, and also when it will be available in India. Is this going to be a service that Viome will offer, or will you take what you've studied and patent it for other people to start offering it? How would this work?
So this is, by the way, it's not a concept. We have been doing it for 4 years. In fact, several hundred thousands people already taken. So hundreds of thousands of people have already taken the test and benefited from that. There is not a day goes by, Faye, where I don't get the email and saying, I used to have acne and it's completely gone. I no longer have eczema. I used to take these drugs. I'm no longer taking the drugs. My depression or my anxiety is completely gone. And again, the point is, we're not curing these diseases. It's simply getting rid of the inflammation in the body that's causing the symptoms that we call diseases. And the interesting thing is, chronic diseases are caused by the chronic inflammation. And as you get rid of this inflammation from the root cause, which is the don't produce the toxins. And if those toxins are not being produced, you don't have the inflammation. And that's how you build immunity. When you have a strong immune system, we don't get infected by COVID-19 or flu or any of these diseases.
Okay, so we have a ton of questions to work through, and I love a good challenge as a moderator. So this is what we'll do. Since the two of you are in two completely different parts of the world, I'll ask a question. If you prefer to answer that question, just put your hand up so I know to come to you.
Yeah.
And we don't have, we're not talking over each other as much as some journalists enjoy that. I also, we'll try and keep the answers quick so we can work through as many questions as we can. All right, the first question, a very obvious one that everyone's asking is this. When you did say, of course, that it's about diet and lifestyle, what we know about diet and lifestyle so far, what doctors have told us, and what I've always found interesting is that it changes every 10 years, right? So we were told when we were growing up that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, that you have to eat a big breakfast, you have to eat a good breakfast, don't skip breakfast. And now we have people doing something called intermittent fasting, where they go for hours and hours without eating anything at all. So does what you have discovered throw all of that out of the window? Is any of what we know so far still valid? Dr. Vuyisich, you want to take that?
Yeah, my comment is that the reason why breakfast was hot 10 years ago is because cereal companies pushed for it, right? The reason dairy was so popular 20 years ago was because dairy industry pushed for it. Red meat, same thing. You pick any type of food, you look back where the push came from. It had nothing to do with science. Also, today, it's not that dairy was popular or coffee was popular 10 years ago. Things change daily. You can read a paper today that says coffee is great for you, and you go drink a lot of coffee for the next 10 days, and then a paper comes out says, uh-oh, coffee is bad for you, right? So there's conflicting evidence for every single type of food. And the reason for that is that every single study is small, and the random chance of the people entering that small study determine the outcome of the study. But the question that the scientists are asking is wrong. They're asking, is coffee good for everyone or is it bad for everyone? It's a wrong question to ask. And so the entire study is flawed from the beginning. What they should be asking is, who is coffee good for and how do we know that? And who's coffee bad for and how do we know that? And that's our concept at Viome. And we apply that concept to every other food. Another point I want to make is that if there was one diet like Mediterranean diet or some kind of ketogenic diet that worked well for everyone and kept everyone healthy and thin, it would have already been found. We've explored hundreds of fad diets and none of them work for everyone. And that's because we all have different gut microbiomes. And so there is no one diet that fits everyone. You have to essentially know what your gut microbiome is and what food to feed the microbiome. And you have to understand your own physiology using data, hard data for every single person. You can't guess.
So there isn't one food that we know is good for the gut. Or what about fiber that cleans your gut out and keeps it?
Well, so fiber is a hot topic, but there are hundreds of different kinds of fibers. And depending on which bacteria you have in your gut microbiome, they will process or consume different kinds of fibers and produce either beneficial or harmful chemicals. And so you, again, you have to measure exactly which bacteria you have, what activities they perform, and which fibers precisely need to be fed to that person. And so today, for example, what we've done at Viome that I'm extremely proud of, which is what we set out to do today, when the data are analyzed from someone's stool sample and they pass the clinical quality control criteria, 100% of the algorithms that are applied to those data in order to produce someone's personalized diet are AI driven, meaning there are no people involved with their opinions or anecdotes or experiences. It is literally, we measure the chemistry of someone's microbiome and we apply mathematical algorithms to that data to come up with a diet for that person. And what's very cool is that if you take 100 random people and measure their gut microbiome, every one of those people will get a different diet recommendation from Viome. The only exception to that we found so far is some very small number of couples who have lived for a long time together. They have nearly identical gut microbiomes, and they will get essentially the same diet recommendations. Otherwise, that's not the case. Even most couples that have been married for a long time, they still get different diet recommendations.
So if you spend long enough together, not only do you start looking like each other on the outside, you start to look like each other on the inside as well.
Some couples gut microbiomes look remarkably similar, yes.
We have Ravi Kalampalli who's asked a question of what steps are you taking to integrate healthcare professionals in the delivery of this solution, and what technology solutions are you using to solve distance between patients, doctors, and your solution? Mr. Jain, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, obviously, we are working directly with the consumers. We are working with the physicians. And the answer is to be able to empower each one of us to know exactly what's happening inside, give you something that's actionable, and then prove it to you that it works. And that's, I think, the first time we really have closed the loop. We measure what is happening inside your body. We give you everything that you need. And by the way, we're going to be launching a service that's going to be actually making the supplements that are made to order for each individual. That means we look at your gut and we look at your body, we look at your blood, we look at your saliva and everything that's happening in your body. And so you need 22 milligrams of lycopene, you need 11 milligrams of butyrate, you need 10 milligrams of that. And we make it specifically just for each one of you. And as opposed to believing in the faith that just believe us, it works, we show it to you that it actually works. And that's the key, right?
That sounds expensive though.
It is, my point is, it is cheap because we are able to do that at a mass scale. As you know, we have now hundreds of thousands of people who are taking tests every few months. And that's the trick. When you have massive amount of volume, the cost of doing things used to be thousands of dollars. Now they're under $100. And that's the key to the thing is, as the volume goes up, the prices come down, and our hope is to really make it as low as possible, because we're not trying to make money, we're trying to solve the humanity's problem.
And also, Faye,
yes, please,
also, Faye, when you get personalized supplements, it's actually much less expensive than taking randomly guessed supplements. So yes, obviously, our choice of which supplements we choose today is based on marketing. It's not based on data, whereas Viome recommendations are based on data. And so one of the major problems we've had to work with supplement manufacturers is that we tell everyone that we're going to be offering actually much fewer supplements to people, and they're going to be selling much fewer supplements. And that's why no other supplement manufacturer wants to work with us.
Precision supplements. All right. So yes. I'm going to combine a few questions for Dr. Vuyisich because there are so many of them. Fasting, which is considered also in India, people do very often consider a way to sort of clean out and refresh your gut. Does that work? Anand Makija says probiotic food or prebiotic food, stuff that's sold right now. Does that work? And another question that I'll throw in while I'm asking it, you did say, and both of you used the word evolved. Human beings have evolved to where we are to do with microbiome. Have we evolved to then process the kind of preservatives that are in our food, which obviously was not the case 50 years ago?
Right.
I mean, Popeye was eating spinach out of a tin. That couldn't have been fresh spinach. So
yeah.
What does that mean?
Let's talk about the preservatives. So today in the United States, the FDA has approved 10,000 synthetic chemicals to be added as food, right, as being safe. Well, guess what? Our immune system that has evolved over millions of years has never seen those 10,000 chemicals that have come in the last 50 years. and there's no way that our body and physiology can deal with them. So no, we're not used to this onslaught of chemical, attack. In terms of your first question was about
Fasting and other
yeah.
things.
Yeah, so fasting is a fascinating thing. So it's the only way that we know of that can extend a human life and animal life in general. And so in general, it's very beneficial, but it actually can be detrimental to some people because a certain combination of bacteria, when fasting, they will actually consume the mucus that's secreted by our own cells to sort of keep a distance between our immune system and the gut microbiome. And so under certain circumstances, fasting can be bad for certain people. And so soon we're going to be coming out with a specific recommendation for people whether to fast or not. And then in terms of prebiotics and probiotics, vast majority of probiotics consumed today, and I'm talking about much greater than 90%, never make it to the colon, first of all, meaning they don't arrive at the colon alive. So you're just completely wasting your money. Second of all, even if they do arrive alive, they're not going to likely colonize because they're being fought by the existing microbiome. They don't want newcomers. And so you have to feed them the right combination of prebiotic with that probiotic to colonize. And then the most importantly, as I outlined in one of my slides, you can have a very potentially beneficial microbe in your gut microbiome. Unless it's making the actual beneficial chemical for which you want that probiotic in your gut microbiome, then it's not beneficial to you. Its mere existence doesn't help you. So you have to feed it the right diet. So the process is that we have to bring data-driven precision probiotics to the market, which we are going to do soon. And then we have to feed that probiotic a very specific food, meaning it has ingredients that feed this probiotic not only to colonize and stay alive, but to produce the healthy biochemicals that our physiology requires.
All right, a question from Murlidhar Rajmani. This is actually a yes or no question for Dr. Vuyisich. If an individual has acid reflux or regular acidity, is it a suggestion or an indication that your diet is not, it's not dealing with your gut bacteria very well? Is that your first sign? Can that be taken as your first sign?
So I would say acid reflux has more to do with nutrition and less to do with gut microbiome. So I would definitely try to pay attention to what foods might be triggering acid reflux. But guess what? We don't know much about acid reflux, and we really need to add a lot more science to this. And we have clinical research programs at Viome that are going to look at this so that we can have data-driven decisions in this area.
Right. I want to just move the conversation further to immunity. And that's obviously something everyone's talking about, given where we are. No one would have assumed. We were 6 months ago or a year ago so smug in our understanding or our belief that we had cracked this whole, allopathic medicine, the advancement that the human race had made as far as medical science was concerned. We never imagined that we'd have to lock down the world in an attempt to, sort of contain a virus. How much of immunity depends on microbiome, whether that's gut or, or any other part of the body? Can we actually feed our microbes to boost immunity? And is that the way forward to keep super bugs or super viruses like this one out?
Yeah. Let me try to answer that first. So first of all, we don't necessarily want to boost immunity. One of the major causes of death due to this coronavirus is actually hyperactive immune system. So you've heard of maybe the term cytokine storm. Cytokine storm is our overreaction to the presence of the virus and self-inflicted death. So boosting immunity is not really the right term. It's fine-tuning the immune system is the key. So if the immune system underreacts, it allows the virus to replicate very fast and kill us. If it overreacts, we kill ourselves. So we really want to fine-tune it. And the key regulator of our immune system is the gut microbiome. And so I talked about that chemical called butyrate in one of my slides. And butyrate is one of the key chemical controllers of the immune system. It tells our immune system that we don't currently have an infection, that we currently have a very healthy microbiome, and therefore the immune system should calm down. So that's an anti-inflammatory chemical, and it calms the immune system down so that it doesn't overreact to various pathogens. And then there are other chemical signaling molecules from the microbiome. These are, again, micropoop that is produced by the gut microbiome that provokes the immune system to become hyperactive unnecessarily. And so 70% of our entire body's immune system is actually lining the intestines and listening for the chemical signals coming from the gut microbiome and foods in order to perform its daily tasks. So we thought we knew much about the immune system, but we are just discovering new things every day, how every aspect of the immune system, whether that's innate immunity or B cell immunity or T cell immunity or inflammation, they're all regulated by the microbiome activities.
Right. Mr. Jain, question for you. And this one's from Dipansh Jagga. He says, you did say, of course, that you loved eating spinach, but you were allergic to it. But you also said that the body is constantly adapting to what we eat. Wouldn't that then be the case that 4 months of constantly eating spinach and your body would adapt to it and no longer be allergic? And if that's the case, why doesn't that also apply to the medicines you're taking or anything else that you're eating? That's question one. There's another interesting question that's come in from Rajendra Pradhan, who says, homeopathy has been recommended as preventive medicine. What is your view on that? Naveen Jain.
So first of all, the drugs we take, many of the drugs modify our microbiome themselves. And in fact, it's now shown that drugs such as metformin, which is for diabetes, actually work by modifying the microbiome. And they have proven it from taking the poop from the person who's taking metformin and actually transplanting into someone else who has diabetes, and just that microbiome transplant actually has the same effect as metformin. That means that actually the microbiome has fundamentally changed. And in fact, last week there was a research that also showed that statin drugs modify the microbiome, and in some cases actually prevent obesity. And it's really very fascinating is that how drugs modify the microbiome and how microbiome modifies the drug itself. So for example, when you take a drug for Parkinson's called levodopa, it gets, in some people, their microbiome eat the drug. And that means that humans have no impact of it because microbiome have eaten the drug or metabolized the drug. So point is, it's an interactive system where what we eat changed by the microbiome, and effect of that sometimes can be beneficiary and sometimes can be very toxic and sometimes actually have no effect. So all of these things come together. On homeopathic side, there is such a little science on homeopathy so far. In fact, I would argue that if homeopathy someday is going to become as good as naturopathy, then you have to literally do a lot of research and see how each individual changes are based on the thing that they're giving in the homeopathy. And it's, again, it needs to be personalized. Going back to what Momo said, there is no such thing that works for everyone, whether it is fasting, whether eating spinach or broccoli. It is literally personalized at the base of the time, at that instant, how your body is going to react to that. And as your body changes, you have to change yourself.
All right. Let's also talk about herd immunity then. And this is, I know this is a COVID-specific question, where people believe, or there's one school of thought that believes that locking down is a good idea and keeping people safe is a good idea. The other school of thought is arguing that actually locking down is a bad idea because we're actually dropping immunity and we're going to wind up just sitting indoors for a very long time. It makes more sense to get the virus to infect a large number of people. Given what you know so far, based on your studies, do you believe that herd immunity is a thing? And is it a thing that the world should be considering at this point as a solution or an exit strategy to where we are right now? Either of
So first of all, lockdown. So lockdown is primarily to take care of the healthcare system in itself, right? So the idea is that healthcare system gets so overwhelmed when so many people suddenly become sick. And so the idea of lockdown was never to somehow find a cure for this. So it was simply to flatten the curve. Area under the curve is still going to be the same. That means the number of people who are going to get infected is going to be the same, but they're going to be much longer period of time that allows our healthcare system to catch up. And that's the whole idea. So the herd immunity obviously works because once you can only infect, less than one person for a person, then you essentially start to slow down. But so far what we're seeing on the coronavirus is that not necessarily, we don't understand that why some people are not developing the antibodies even after they are infected and they have a chance to get reinfected. So the coronavirus, as you know, came from bats, and bats have very strong immune system. And that's the reason any disease or any virus that comes from bats on any animal or human beings tend to be extremely deadly. So SARS and MERS. They all came from, they are basically type of coronaviruses. So this is not the first time we have seen a coronavirus. Somehow people think coronavirus is new. Coronavirus has been with us for a very, very long time. It is just that this particular what tends to be is a little bit more viral, in a sense that it actually is infecting more people and more seriously. And being a novel virus, none of us have any immunity to it. But as we are building the immunity to it, and I really hope that we're going to find a vaccine that essentially will get rid of this problem. And so our hope really is to be able to survive long enough to have a vaccine for it. And that's really the only way we're going to solve this problem.
Dr. Vuyisich, question for you. Is it possible to actually, through diet, sort of protect our children? Because they're brand new, they're just starting off, they haven't already made the mistakes that we have made. Is there something we can do differently?
Absolutely. So if anyone can just read the scientific literature, and there's lots of it now showing that the gut microbiome is essential for physiological development of newborns, both in terms of neurodevelopment and immune system development and just general health. And so there's very strong evidence that the right diet early on is very important, starting with breast milk. I encourage the audience to read about human milk oligosaccharides and the importance of bifidobacteria that consume those human milk oligosaccharides from breast milk and actually prevent other pathogens from setting in and dysregulating the immune system and potentially leading to neurodevelopmental disorders. So absolutely, yes.
And Momo, only thing I want to add is that it starts during pregnancy. So you really, as a mother or as a parent, before you even have a child, to make sure the mother's microbiome is actually healthy, because a good gut microbiome during pregnancy is going to really be the best shot at having a healthy child.
Yeah, that's extremely important point, that I believe very firmly that for example, the huge rise in neurodevelopmental diseases in children we've seen is likely due to overuse of antibiotics during pregnancy. And so we really need to bring data-driven antibiotic prescriptions during pregnancy, and we need to bring dietary and other methods of restoring a healthy microbiome in pregnant women so that children don't develop neurodevelopmental disorders and so on.
Well, I do want to ask you this, since you brought up antibiotics, and this is something that people in India are starting to get very concerned about, because we know that the healthcare system willy-nilly sort of prescribes antibiotics for almost everything. And as a result, Indians are largely becoming, we have superbugs developing like tuberculosis that are resistant to antibiotics. And have you learned also that the overuse of antibiotics would wipe out our gut microbes, or is it having an effect? Should we stop?
Absolutely, absolutely. The overuse of antibiotics is actually one of the absolute root causes of the chronic disease pandemic that we are currently experiencing. And preservatives added to the foods are just another name for antibiotics. So they're just adding fuel to the fire. And so remember, going back to my story, all you have to think about is that humans have evolved to depend on thousands of biochemicals produced by the microbiome. And those biochemicals are produced by a healthy microbiome that converts our food into those biochemicals. If that gut microbiome is missing, it's not there, those biochemicals cannot be just provided out of thin air. And so our health absolutely depends on a healthy microbiome. And taking antibiotics for a pathogen is like having a terrorist somewhere and you're dropping a nuclear bomb on the area. That makes no sense, right? Now, there are still very good reasons for taking antibiotics for strep infections and things like that, but we have to put in place very accurate and very reliable tests that allow for prescription of antibiotics only when we actually know that they're needed. Otherwise, today, vast majority of antibiotic prescriptions are unnecessary.
So, for example,
and I think, Momo, can I just add one more thing here?
Okay.
In the future, they're not going to be these broad-based antibiotics, as Momo said. They're like throwing a nuclear bomb that kills everyone. In the future, we're going to have very, very specific antibiotics for each pathogen that we find. Is going to be more like a precision missile. So it's going to be like a phages that only infects that bacteria and only kills that bacteria that's the pathogen that we want to kill, rather than everything else around. So I think future of the medicine is going to be very different.
I have a follow-up question to the antibiotic conversation. Because we also know now that it's in our dairy because it's being given to the cows across the world. That
Absolutely.
it's in your poultry because it's being given to the chickens to make them stronger. So it's not just the prescription antibiotics that we're consuming, but it's all of the other stuff that's being injected into the animal products that then come to us. So
So
how green this is that?
Yeah,
So
that's
I
a,
think,
that's a
first of all, why do we do that? I mean, so you have to ask yourself, why do we give the antibiotics to the cows? To make the cows fat. So the reason we do that is to kill their microbiome, make them fat so we can make more money from it. And obviously it is to also protect them from infection. Anytime you're eating the food that comes from these animals, whether it's chicken or cow, that antibiotic goes into your gut, and that's literally you're ingesting that antibiotics, killing your own gut microbiome, and literally developing all the same diseases. And that's the reason the world has this epidemic of obesity, diabetes, heart diseases, because remember, these diseases are caused by the lack of the nutrition that our microbiome was supposed to provide. So it's now, instead of providing the nutrients, it's providing the toxins. And that's literally why every one of us is developing, and 90% of us suffering from chronic diseases.
Dr. Vuyisich, does
Momo?
that mean we become vegan? Is that a
even becoming, veganism is a very good movement for health and environment, but some people do need to eat animal products for nutrition. Um, Remember, everyone needs a different diet. Veganism is not the solution for everyone, I think. Anyways, yes, people need to be very careful what they consume. You know, I don't know how the rules are in India, but in the United States, the food industry is very powerful and they play tricks on consumers. So I'll give you a couple of tricks that they play here. They likely play in India as well. So one of them is that they've gotten the FDA to approve, or USDA to approve, a label called natural. So natural means something to you and me, but as a technical food term, as a label, it means that since the animal was slaughtered, it was not given any chemicals. But until the moment it was slaughtered, it could have been pumped with antibiotics literally until the minute it died. You can still label that meat natural. And so when you walk to a grocery store and a person who doesn't know this, and they go read the label natural chicken, of course they're going to think this is great. But in fact, that chicken can harbor large amounts of antibiotics. So that's one trick. The second trick is that the food industry will label preservatives, which are actually antibiotics. They kill bacteria. They will label them something like to preserve freshness. When you see something to preserve freshness, that's just a nice way of saying this is going to kill your microbiome. So be very careful with that, because they added to even probiotic rich foods. For example, if you go buy sauerkraut or kimchi, they will add sodium benzoate, and then they will put in parentheses to preserve freshness. What that sodium benzoate does is it actually kills all the healthy microorganisms that were there in that kimchi or that sauerkraut to preserve it in a jar for years on the shelf in the grocery store. But then you consume that, and now you're killing your own microbiome. So instead of having a beneficial effect, it's actually having a detrimental effect. So you really have to go and educate yourself about all the tricks that the food industry is playing on us.
In fact, there was one school of thought that believed that since the natural progression of everything in nature is to rot and die, that your food should actually be food that rots and dies in a couple of days. And that's really real food. Anything that can sit on a shelf for a long time is no good. That's furniture. That's not food.
Exactly.
Vivek has a great question, Mr. Jain. He says, wouldn't the human race develop different gut microbiomes based on where they lived, along with what they were eating over the last hundreds of years? So, for example, someone who lived in a very cold part of the world, like Canada, would obviously be very different from someone who lived in an equatorial region or a tropical region or part of the world. Has your research shown different geographical samples or racial samples are actually responding differently?
Yes, it's very interesting is that people who actually eat different food, live in a different region, can have completely different microbiome. In fact, the people living in the same region can have completely different microbiome. So it is not about who is there. The trick really is to understand what they are producing. So what you can see is that two people living in a completely different part of the world can have completely different microbiome, but producing exactly the same toxins or producing exactly the same nutrients that are good for the body. It's like a rainforest. Every step you take in a rainforest is completely unique, yet it can be lush and green. So that means you don't have to have the same microbes to actually be healthy. They can be completely different. There is no such thing as one healthy microbiome.
All right. There are some questions about AI and what that can teach us. And when you say that every individual is different, this was an interesting question. Are we eventually going to wind up with 20 sort of pockets in which we can each be pegged one way or the other, or maybe 50
No.
pockets in which we can each peg, or are they actually 7 billion pockets?
So it's going to be billions of combinations. So it is literally going to be billions of different ways people can actually be healthier. It's not tens or 20s, and it's not going to be 9 billion, but it's going to be definitely billions.
Right. Purnima wants to know what are body toxins, and and obviously this is now starting to scare people. Dr. Vuyisich, someone else asked about, and this is a genuine problem we have in India, the number of pesticides and fertilizers that are used on our vegetables and food. They're constantly sprayed with chemicals. Obviously, consuming that will also have an effect at some point on our insides.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to get away from farming that relies on pesticides, and we need to go back to organic farming the way it's supposed to be, where the food is nutritious and has all the minerals and vitamins that our bodies have evolved to depend on. And we need to get away from these chemicals that our bodies are not used to. We just
And I think
have to be.
only thing I was
Yes.
going
Go
to
ahead.
add was that, the soil is the gut of the plant. So if you can adjust the microbial ecosystem of the soil, then it's literally that healthy gut, the healthy soil would get rid of the need for pesticides and insecticide. So literally we have to, reinvent the agriculture to go back to the future. I mean, going back to how we used to do agriculture is to really have a natural ecosystem that gets rid of all these pathogens and insects. And that's the way, if we grow our food, you're going to have a healthy, nutritious food that's healthy for our body. And it's not about being a vegan, it's about really eating a food that's free of these chemicals that destroy our body's ecosystem.
But again, isn't that an idealist sort of assumption, especially in large parts of the world where we're not, I mean, we're barely feeding everyone. So when food itself is the question, the quality of food, and to actually consider growing food naturally is going to be a challenge. How are we going to come about actually achieving that?
Yeah, so
But
it's,
the world is changing. Go ahead, please
I
go
don't
ahead,
think
Momo.
it's going to be a challenge. There are now companies that make fully automated organic farms that are self-contained, that don't use any chemicals whatsoever, and that have very high output of very nutritious foods. I encourage the audience to watch the movie that I absolutely fell in love with. It's called The Biggest Little Farm. It's basically a documentary about a couple, and they built an organic farm in California, but they show what it takes to do very highly productive organic farming that produces food that's very nutritious and very healthy for us. All it takes is to create an ecosystem that's diverse and doesn't have, when we kill snakes, when we kill birds, when we kill, major components of an ecosystem, we make it unhealthy because we allow all these pests to come in and take over, and then we use pesticides against them. And so we've essentially we've completely disrupted the natural ecosystem where we've allowed individual pests to take over. And once you reestablish that ecosystem, things just nature works on its own.
All
So
right, last question before we've completely run out of time. Anirban Das Gupta asks, does yoga/exercise increase immunity without taking any medication or modifying diets? Also, does exercise help the body digest better, and by that also help the gut, microbiome? Dr. Vuyisich?
So
yeah,
exercise, so
go ahead,
please go
Naveen.
ahead, Momo.
No,
I was
go.
saying exercise has shown to actually change gut microbiome. And what we really, the last research that came out was that when you exercise, it helps your microbiome. It's a temporary change. That means when you stop exercising, your gut microbiome goes back. So in a sense that it does help your gut microbiome. Exercise is good for you, but don't think the exercise is the way you can change the functional output of the microbiome for the long term. Momo, you will add something?
I just want to add that exercise is beneficial for our immune system, for our memory, for our mental health, and for the microbiome. There's lots of evidence in the literature of that. I love a recent study that just came out a couple of weeks ago showing that lactic acid that is produced either during exercise or it can be produced by certain lactobacillus microorganisms in the gut. It is essential for our memory. And so basically, it's a chemical signaling messenger for our brain to function normally. And so when you exercise really hard, this is called high intensity intermittent exercise training. When you exercise really hard and you generate that lactic acid, it's actually good for you. So.
All right, we've run out of time. Gentlemen, thank you so much. It's been an extremely enlightening 1 hour. I can tell by the number of questions that have gone unanswered, but I do know that the team at TEDx Gateway will find a way to get your questions to both Mr. Jain and Dr. Vuyisich and try and get you some answers. It's obviously a future that's bright and worth looking forward to, as grim as it might, the present might seem. There's plenty to learn from where we are, and we're still figuring out so much about what's inside our own bodies. So we'll remember that while we were in school, we were all told that we're all unique, just like everybody else. And this now actually extends to our healthcare and the solutions that we're going to need for our healthcare. So eventually, we will all have unique solutions, just like everybody else. Thank you.
Yashat. Thank you, Faye. Thank you, Faye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Momo. Thank you, Naveen, and thank you, Faye. Thank you for joining us today. We had a very interesting session. I'm already getting feedback, and this is amazing. More and more people learn about themselves during these lockdowns. They're able to go and understand things better. And I really hope that once we learn in this lockdown period, we are able to implement and go back to a better world, not just for ourselves, but also for others around. So thank you. I hope to see you guys next week. We have an interesting and a stellar lineup coming up next weekend. There's one on a professor who's known as Dr. Happiness. And there's also an interesting lineup on climate change that's going to come up. So I hope you guys sign up and go to tedxgateway.com/webinar and sign up for the next sessions. And thank you again to all the attendees for tuning in. Thank you, Naveen. Thank you, Dr. Momo, and thank you, Faye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, team. Excellent.
Bye.